My name is Tyler Fornes, and I am one of the co-hosts of the Good, the Bad, and the Hungy AEW podcast here on the Voice of Wrestling Podcasting Network. We take a broad scope approach to the world of All Elite Wrestling and the entire universe of Tony Khan. We talk about the big matches, the big stars, the promos, the storylines, and we also look at it from a big picture perspective. How are things going to change over the course of the next 10 years with AEW still in the picture? How are companies like WWE going to adapt and adjust to AEW? Are they going to be a similar way like they did with WCW in the late 1990s? Will there be a counterpunch? We talk about all of that and more on The Good, the Bad, and the Hungy every week on the Voice of Wrestling Network.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am your host, as always, Jesse Collings, and joining me once again, returning to the show, he is the host of the Emerald Flowshow here on the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Almost got through a good intro without butchering it. He is the host of that show. He covers all things Noah, all things All Japan, all things really Puro under the umbrella. He is our correspondent from Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Some have referred to him as the Samuel Gompers of Canada. It is Gerard Di Trolio.
Hi, Jesse. Thanks for having me back on the show. And I'm very actually quite excited to talk about something that I don't get to talk about on my own show because like we don't have any hard and fast rules. Like I just recorded an episode earlier today and we covered some big Japan for the first time in probably at least a year. But I think there's so many other people talking about New Japan that I don't really ever bother talking about it, maybe for except for a few comments as an aside. So I'm like really excited to talk about it today.
Yeah, that's the cool thing about your show is that you're really focused on non-New Japan Puro because and that's like a huge niche to find because there's so many like a vast majority of Puro podcasts or people covering Japanese pro wrestling are focused on New Japan. And now a lot more Joshi coverage as well, but your show really tries to tackle all of the things in between uh, those two things. And I think, like you said, like you don't really talk about that much, but that gives off the impression that it's like you're watching New Japan. You know what's going on. You're not like somebody who's just not non-New Japan viewer.
No, I've stuck with New Japan as long as I've stuck with All Japan and Noah. That is to say, like over 25 years now, since I was about 14 years old.
Yeah,
So
this would
I've
be
seen it all.
this would be a bad podcast if we start and you're like, man, I don't really watch New Japan anymore. I'd be like, oh no, bad booking by me to get this guest on. But the reason I had you on specifically was because when you were on my 100th episode special, where I basically had everyone come on and give a hot take about wrestling and talk about it for 10 to 15 minutes, your hot take was that Gedo should be out as the booker of New Japan Pro Wrestling. And at the time, I was like, "Whoa, that's a hot take," which was kind of the whole point of the episode. So I'm glad you said it. Um, I didn't necessarily like agree with it, but I understood where you were coming from. But now that we're 6 months after that, now that I kind of got through this Dominion show and I've just been thinking a lot more about New Japan, not only am I with you, but I'm also just like, I feel like the whole situation regarding New Japan's creative decisions has gotten completely ridiculous and there isn't enough scrutiny out there that's calling it out for what it is, where this is a promotion with no new ideas that rehashes the same, simple angles pretty much on every single show. And it's been this way for years and years. And I'm tired of making excuses. I'm tired of overlooking a lot of the crap that we've had to endure. The fact of the matter is, this is not a well-booked wrestling promotion, and it hasn't been a well-booked wrestling promotion for years now. And I think part of the reason I've been reluctant to kind of admit that is because of the nature of what New Japan Pro Wrestling is, which is it is a very steady, cyclical promotion where you have your benchmarks throughout the year, where you have Wrestle Kingdom, you have the G1, you have the New Japan Cup, you have the Build to Dominion, you have the Tag League, you have the Best of Super Juniors, right? You get this kind of same stuff every single year that creates an inherent excitement about them. And I also understand, they've lost some wrestlers over time, over the last few years. It takes time to build up new stars, all of that. So I'll think like, oh, New Japan, it's not what it was, but it's still pretty good. That's certainly true to an extent. There's still a lot of good wrestlers in New Japan. There are still matches that take place in New Japan that are among my favorite matches that I watch every single year. Um, there's still some good in New Japan. It's not total crap, but I feel like I find myself making excuses for what this company has really become, which is a boring company with a lot of wrestlers I don't care about, a match structure that's gotten very repetitive, and a booker that has no new creative ideas and hasn't had him for quite a long time. And I'm just sick of it. And I think that a lot of people are in the same situation I was, where it's like, yeah, I don't really like House of Torture. Like, oh, I don't like all the interference bullshit, but it's still New Japan. It's my bread and butter. It's that good feeling. There's nothing like watching the G1 when it comes out, or it's nothing like watching a Wrestle Kingdom, a big Tokyo Dome show, or a big show at Korakuen Hall. And you got kind of sucked into being like, well, it's still holding this level of quality, so it can't be all bad. But when you actually think about the creative effort that's gone into this company over the last few years, when you actually think about what stars have been elevated, which stars have failed to be elevated, what the booking decisions have been, this is a disaster of a company. Like it is a absolute disaster. That doesn't mean to say there's wrestlers I like, and there's some stuff over the last few years that I've enjoyed, but this is a disaster. What this company has become in terms of the roster, in terms of how we feel about the younger wrestlers on the roster, how we feel about some of the older wrestlers or wrestlers that should be in their prime, this thing's a complete mess. And Gato's had enough time to try to figure something out and pivot, and that's clearly not in his playbook. And that's why I wanted to have you on the show because I'm sick of this, and I don't know how much longer I really want to justify giving New Japan the kind of amount of attention I've been giving it over the last decade, because it's not an enjoyable watch.
Well, first, I would advise to anyone if you are ever feeling like you don't want to give something your attention and you don't feel guilty from walking away from it. I don't think that's good for your fandom or just how you sort of consume any type of media. That being said, what's interesting, I thought recently, was the discourse around Dominion. I'm not going to defend the show and say it was great, but I saw a certain type of fan get more pissed off than I was from that show. And I think it's because I have already bracketed out what I think was absolute crap, i.e., House of Torture before. So the turns and the dog collar match do not like, I don't like them, but it did not get to me in the same way that it seemed to have gone to a lot of people. And even I know Dave was saying like his responses to the to Dominion were more favorable than the reaction he saw to it online, which I thought was interesting. I think so. I think a certain type of hardcore New Japan fan was obviously like completely disgusted by the show. That being said, you're not wrong on all of your other points about the direction of this company. And what I think is perfectly reasonable when you say, don't give it the attention, don't walk away. There has been a lot of doubts given to Gedo that he has exceeded or overcome. Uh, if you look at the last, I think he started booking it in 2009. So we might be about 16 years into this. Right? Remember the Okada return at the Tokyo Dome in 2012 was a dud. A few months later, everybody forgot about that. There were other duds like along the way, or at least things that started out as very shaky, like AJ Styles coming into New Japan, or Jay White when he debuted the Switchblade character when he returned from his excursion. And these things sort of like, oh my God, everything turned out so well. But Gedo has lost that ability to stick the landing even after a shaky takeoff or start. And I think that, yes, everybody talks about House of Torture, and it is absolutely one of the worst things I've seen in 26 years of watching Japanese wrestling. I cannot think of anything. Well, actually, I can think of a couple of things that I hate more, like the whole Enochiism era. But and to House of Torture's, I give him some credit. It's not quite business killing as Enochiism was. So in that regard, that's kind of true. Like business is down, but business hasn't fallen out. I mean, they're completely collapsed. I think they're sort of gliding on their name brand as being the largest wrestling promotion in Japan and just had an incredible, whatever decade, 8 years from 2012 to 2020 of one of the greatest eras of professional wrestling ever. But all good things have come to an end, and Gedo can no longer overcome those shaky starts that he used to have. And I think even more damning to the company than House of Torture is this inability to get that next star, whether it is Yota Tsuji or Yuya Uemura or much has already been said about Shota Umino. I don't even have that much to say that hasn't already been said. Now, obviously, we could talk about Aaron Wolf and what the consequences of signing an Olympic judo gold medalist is going to be for the company, and that's huge. But am I a little more under different circumstances would I be more? And first of all, I'm not saying I'm not optimistic about Aaron Wolf. Someone with his pedigree usually excels, especially in Japanese pro wrestling. But anything can happen, and so I feel like the likelihood of this not succeeding is just that much higher because of what Geto's been doing these last couple of years, basically since the pandemic.
Yeah, like obviously Gedo is a Hall of Fame level booker. He's done some absolutely
Absolutely.
amazing things. But this is wrestling history, is that bookers overstay their welcome and they're rarely good for decades and decades and decades. You can point to some of the greatest bookers in wrestling history, Riki Choshu, Bill Watts, these guys that were great bookers at one point, they lose it at some points. And like great, the Okada, push, that's ancient history. The Okada push is like closer to like the turn. I think like it's probably pretty close, but it's like closer to the turn of the millennium.
It
We're about
is.
that same distance away from the turn of the millennium to today as we are to the Okada, decision. So, uh, like I kind of don't want to hear about that anymore. Obviously, it was a good decision, but like that's ancient history. The wrestling
Yeah.
landscape is completely different. Company's completely different. Um, this House of Torture stuff. House Torture was founded in 2021. We're actually coming close on 4 years or 5 years of
No,
House of
I think
Torture.
wasn't it not 2020 when Evil won the IWGP title? So we were
I think,
5 years
I think
from
like officially we're doing
uh,
2021, but you're right. It's been going
okay.
on for technically longer than
The
that.
Evil push is what I would date it to, really.
Yeah, he wins the New Japan Cup in 2020. So we're like let's just say 5 years of House of Torture. It's the same thing every time. A lot of, running in, interference, Dick Togo, garrote wire, low bar. They all got like their own like little gimmicks. Like Dick Togo's got his garrote wire. There's a show's got like the push-up bar. Kanemaru has the whiskey bottle. Like they all got their little shitty gimmicks. Um, they come in, they get heat by cheating, and then sometimes the baby faces overcome it, but most of the time it's just like a lazy, boring match, and it happens every single time that these guys are in the ring, and it's been going on for years and years and years, and it happens on almost every single show. And I can't believe it, honestly, Gerard. Like if any other wrestling promotion was doing this, where it's the same thing every single time, week after week, show after show, year after year. I mean, imagine if like an American wrestling promotion was doing this, where they just had one stable that did the exact same thing every single time. I mean, Death Riders have only been around for like under a year, and people are like a few months in were like losing their minds about how repetitive all their stuff was. And the House of Torture just is endless. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. And it never changes. And people will argue and they'll say, oh, well, they get good heat, and then when the babyface overcomes, it's a pop, and oh, they sell some merchandise. This shit sucks, and it sucked for such a long time. And it blows my mind that they can keep just doing this over and over and over again. And it's not like a business killer the way that like Enochiism was, because Enochiism was like this whole promotional philosophy of who they were going to put in the main event and things like that. House of Torture has been for the most part an undercard act. There's been times where it's weighted more into the main event, but it's mostly like a mid-card undercard act, feuding over tag titles and stuff like that. But it has just been the same thing over and over and over again. And also it's also coming on the heels of, the Bullet Club, which was at the time kind of novel that they were this villainous stable of foreigners doing a lot of interference. Like, but really the whole philosophy dates back even further earlier than 2020 or 2021, before that evil push. We've been seeing that's one of Gato's grand ideas and grand philosophies is just to have this, super shitter stable that has all these interference matches, and it never ever changes, and it's become so repetitive, and it leads to so much, just all these wrestlers who maybe some of whom maybe could have had promising careers have just kind of had their, this is what they are. This is what Ren Narita is going to be. This is what Sho has become. This is what Sonata has become. Could these guys be doing more? I think so. But one of Gato's grand ideas is if he kind of gives up on somebody, he puts them as oh, you'll just be a shitty cheating heel. And the roster's full of these guys. And, you talked about like, kind of the mixed reaction Dominion had, where some people who seemed more like the more hardcore, like watch every show, New Japan fans were more upset with Dominion than maybe some of the less hardcore fans. I'll tell you right now, the way I have watched New Japan over the last few years, I don't watch the shows live. I watch them afterwards, which, obviously makes a lot more sense given I live where I live and the shows are on,
Right.
in the middle of the night. But, for I don't know, last few years, unless it's an absolutely major must-see match, I see a House of Torture match and I press that arrow next match. I'm not watching that stuff. I watched
No,
when I
I
first the first time I watched Dominion, I did watch the dog collar match because that was like a big enough match for me to want to watch. I wish I didn't. But I was like, oh, this IWGP Junior Heavyweight title match with Doki and Sho as House of Torture. So that's a skip. And like, so I'm just picking out the stuff I watched. So like, I didn't hate Dominion. My experience watching Dominion, I didn't hate it as much as a lot of people because I'm like, I'm watching the tag title match. I'm watching the Oleg Boltin and Takeshita match. I'm watching, a strong main event with Goto and Takagi. I'm watching the Gabe Kidd Yota Tsuji match. Like, I was like, that show wasn't that bad. But I also didn't watch outside the dog collar match a lot of the Drek on that show. And so, and that like, and that's like not good. Like for like that I, as a fan of New Japan, am like, wow, there's a lot of matches on these cards that I just want to skip. I don't want to watch them because I know they're going to be bad, and I know they're going to make me mad, and I know they're going to be frustrating for me to watch. That's like not good. But that's just a reality of where I've come to watching the promotion, and I bet you a lot of people are in the same spot.
yeah, I agree. I mean, I just see there's been a steady decline. I mean, obviously, the very first Evil title reign turned off a lot of people, but yet some people kept going through, and it just seems every year over year, there's just that, a slightly less noticeable, more amount of people that you could see that have turned off. And I think that it's in part like if you think about, when a booker loses their fastball, so to speak, Gedo always had repetitive beats to his booking. If you
Mm.
remember when Bad Luck Fale turned heel and debuted the Bad Luck Fall. It was like every spot show, even not just the big shows. He would come out, do the Bad Luck Fall, then someone would get stretchered out. There was that one year when it was like Gorillas of Destiny and Fale. They would get themselves DQ'd and literally like almost every single G1 tournament match they had. I think that was in 2018 or 2019. And right, and so that's like all the Ghetto thinks that repetition will somehow get something over. And I think that he has totally lost all sense of that. That simply is not the case. It doesn't work, especially in this case.
Yeah, and like I said, yeah, like, and you raised the good point where it's like, again, it's just the same idea over and over again. That's what I can't get over. Like, I know I've said it a few times, so now it's becoming ironic that I keep repeating that Gato's booking is repeating, but I honestly can't believe it. Like like I tolerated it for a long time. Like I tolerated it in New Japan way longer than I would have tolerated it in almost any other wrestling promotion. Um, just and then part of it's like, like I said, like the New Japan calendar is cyclical. You kind of just come to expect these things. New Japan, for as long as I've watched the company closely, which, is right around the time of the formation of the Bullet Club, I have always been, so this is kind of something that I've always lived with New Japan. It's like, oh, they always got like one shitter heel stable that does a lot of interference. Uh, but we're just, it just seems like they're stuck in time. And really, this dates back to, I think, the pandemic and the either loss or kind of phasing down of some key talents. So the AEW is created in 2019. They lose Kenny Omega and they lose to a lesser extent like Chris Jericho and the Young Bucks. And then over time, they've slowly lost more talent. You had the pandemic, which wasn't helpful at all, obviously. Okada jumps to AEW, Tanahashi's phased down. You lose Nakamura even before 2019. Um, so you're kind of left with Naito, and you elevate Osprey, great, and then Osprey leaves. So there's obviously been challenges. I don't want to dispute that there haven't been challenges, but ever since kind of the company needed to begin its next phase, and certainly like from 2021 on, there just hasn't been any cohesive, strong creative direction. It just seems like the company's been limping along with fewer and fewer star power, the same staples kind of being in the same spots. You kind of elevate some guys almost by default, like Zack Sabre Jr. or Goto this year. And the young guys don't get the kind of support or push that they needed to kind of seize the moment and effectively replace some of the star power. And we're left here in 2025 where you have none of those, key cornerstone stars really left. You've kind of got like this B team of veteran main eventers, which is like Goto and Zack and Shingo Takagi. And those guys are some of my favorite wrestlers ever, so I don't want to disparage them. But from a star power perspective, they are not Tanahashi, Okada, Naito. Um, and you don't have really a lot of young guys that are poised to seize the moment. And it doesn't seem like there's any game plan or strategy to get them there. And there has been for years. This is a problem for years, Gerard. It is not something that just emerged in 2025. It is something that we were talking about in 2020. And there just has, and Gato's been in charge this whole time, and there just hasn't been a game plan. And you look at what other wrestling companies over the same time period have done in terms of we got to try to get some new guys. We saw Pro Wrestling Noah was struggling for a long time, but we're starting to see they got Ozawa, they've got Team 2000, which again is a heel shitter staple, but it is at least relatively novel, and you have this exciting new charismatic young wrestler leading the charge. And also, they worked hard with Kiyomiya and things like that. You look at what All Japan has done. Again, not something that I'm a huge fan of, like the Saito brothers, but you have the Saito brothers. You got Yuma Aoyagi over to a degree. You've got Yuma Anzai as this wonder kid kind of talent. You've got new stars in place, and you've got a new direction for the company that's not just the same old stuff over and over again. Look at what Dragon Gate has done, right? They've lost a lot of their top guys, similar to New Japan over a similar time period. What did they do? They found new guys, they got exciting young wrestlers, they got guys they trained, they put them in a position to succeed. It is not an impossible situation that New Japan has found itself in, and that any booker would really struggle to turn things around. And I'm not saying that Gedo needs to hit the heights that he did in the 2010s. I don't think business is going to look the same. But I want to feel like this is a company that has a strong creative direction. And I don't think anyone could argue credibly that it does right now, outside of the same ideas that he's had for the last 15 years.
Well, I don't want to downplay the sort of extenuating circumstances that Gedo and the company had to navigate, especially from, well, starting with the pandemic, but including from 2021 onwards when people got injured and started to also leave. But, you mentioned Nakamura a little earlier. When he left in 2016 alongside AJ Styles and the Good Brothers, he the company did not miss a beat, right? AJ Styles left, Kenny Omega becomes the top foreigner, and in fact becomes a bigger name than AJ Styles ever was in New Japan. And they did not miss Nakamura because he somehow I think Geto's booking of Nakamura, and especially Nakamura's sort of arc as like a guy that debuts with high expectations and then sort of doesn't meet them, but then eventually reinvents himself, even like he's in after having been in the business, I think. I don't know, or like 8 or 9 years from his debut was when he comes up with that more modern Nakamura character, right? That was a unique thing that he slotted him in so well. But again, it's something that you could have pulled out of the New Japan pyramid, so to speak, and you don't miss a beat. And so the point is, Gedo has weathered these sort of departures before, but when this starts to happen again, he is totally amiss. And it's just like everybody loses their fastball. Everything's declined. Now it doesn't shock me that there is other things like there's AEW, there's the pandemic, because obviously one of the things with the pandemic was a lot of the foreigners, they didn't want to come to Japan because of the 2 week quarantine that went on for quite some time, right? But it's just one thing after another, and that sort of wears you down. Probably your booking sharpness. You have to make do because, like, let's be honest here. Under different circumstances, Hiroki Goto is not the IWGP champion right now, and it is almost a shame that he has, but also a credit to him, but also a shame that he has to be this placeholder at this sort of weird transitional moment, right? Get and it's sort of funny after all of this, are beating him like a drum. The title matches, they're just like, I'm out of ideas. None of these young guys are working. Zack Sabre Jr. did not work, which actually kind of surprised me a bit that didn't catch on, and I wonder how much of that is him just not being a tippy top guy versus Gedo booking him poorly, because I think there were some very questionable booking decisions made by that during that title run that again Gedo doesn't have the chops to do it, so he's not able to elevate people and he's not helping the people that are ready to step up. Like, you could debate whether the new Three Musketeers are ready, but I think someone like Zack Sabre Jr. was ready to to hold the top world title, but the booking failed him ultimately, and that's on Gedo.
Yeah, obviously the pandemic was a huge challenge, and it was a bigger challenge for Japanese pro wrestling companies and New Japan Pro Wrestling in particular, than it was here in, North America. And you talk about like it was a really difficult time to get foreigners in particular to come in. It really kind of changed, uh, like in terms of like the Gaijin presence in Japan has never been the same post-pandemic. Now, a lot of that ha happens to be, AEW and WWE
Yeah.
both being very aggressive in signing available talent, but it hasn't been the same in terms of you seeing the kind of volume of talent or promising young talent coming over. Certainly not in New Japan. And so that is obviously an issue. But again, the pandemic wasn't last year.
Yeah.
There has been, I think, enough, and again, this is part of the reason I think I've kind of given New Japan a pass was because the pandemic, we all kind of hand waved it, and the pandemic that impacts the pandemic, lasted longer in Japan.
I
There was a
mean,
lot more
to be
strictness.
fair, you could not cheer until I think January 2023.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, it wasn't like it was like in America by the time it was like, I feel like summer of 2021 things were like pretty
Yeah,
much back to normal in terms of drawing crowds and things like that. I think it was I want to say it was Double or Nothing 2021 was AEW's like kind of they had the crowd the full
I
crowd
believe
in
so. Yeah.
Jacksonville, and that was kind of like in my mind like the return of actual wrestling with crowds in the United States. And so again, I think that's one of the reasons I've been hesitant to kind of criticize him is understanding that obviously this was a huge challenge. But again, it's now been years since then. Um, and there's been time to kind of rebuild and find things. And you just look at the company. I mean, I mentioned House of Torch earlier, but just look at the stables. Like, do we have like forever stables now in New Japan? Where these stables like Bullet Club and Chaos um, are going to be around forever, and just the names and faces are going to change, but it's almost going to be like their sports franchises where the players change, but the franchises stay the same. And a lot of it just feels outdated and like relics from the past. Especially when you don't have the star power in those same roles that you had when those stables were at their peak. Um, and so like I would if I was Gedo, there'd be a lot of changes that I would want to see, but like I'd almost just want to be like, we're disbanding all of our stables and we're starting with a fresh slate. We're gonna have maybe a few different stables. We're gonna have a feeling out process. We're gonna have just new colors, new merchandise, new stuff. Like it just you watch New Japan, it's like, man, this is like a company stuck in time, like dinosaurs enshrined in caves or something like that, where it's just like, oh yeah, it's chaos. Remember chaos? Like it's just not the same. And you even see like Los Ingobernables and United Empire, like their leaders have left the company. And
There's zombie factions.
yeah,
Yes,
they're
wild.
literally zombie factions. Like they're kind of exist. They don't really exist, but they do. And they're like, oh, are we gonna revamp it? Like when Finn Balor Prince Devitt left, they immediately replaced him with AJ Styles, and like AJ Styles is the new leader. Let's go. AJ Styles left Bullet Club and went to WWE. Kenny Omega stepped up. Kenny Omega's the new leader. That kind of thing. This is like they're like, man, we don't really know what we're gonna do with these stables, but we can't really get rid of these stables because we've invested, years of time in them. Certainly in Los Ingobernables has been a huge success in terms of merchandise, but it's like they literally are zombies. And again, I think that speaks to like the lack of willingness to do anything new or interesting, is that they kept these stables around that really have no purpose anymore.
Now, to be fair, I mean, I have no idea, and this is just speculation, but it would not shock me if the Bushi Road marketing department um, is telling them, no, please do not stop using this intellectual property. It has made us a lot of money. That would not shock me either, though.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, there's obviously money, and especially in the Los Ingobernables. But if that is the case, and Naito leaves, like do something with the who's going to step up and be the new leader. Do something direct, like I mentioned with when
Right.
they lost the leaders of the key players of the Bullet Club, they had somebody right there, and it was very good for those individual wrestlers' careers. It was great for AJ Styles. It was great for Kenny Omega. It was great for David Finlay. Um, when they did those kind of big step ups because was a way of elevating those guys into a higher status in terms of star power. That hasn't been the case with either United Empire, which for LIJ, totally I can see that. I have it hard. I find it hard to believe that like
Yeah.
somebody at Bushi Road is like, we gotta keep United Empire stuff around.
Yeah, definitely not in the case of them. I'll give you that.
And I think, a huge part of this story overall is the lack of urgency in terms of pushing these new wrestlers, and especially the younger guys, the Reiwa generation of talent. Probably
Yeah.
mispronounced that. But Yota Tsuji, Shota Umino, Ren Narita, I guess, is part of that. Um,
Yeah. People always forget, but that's because of Ghetto's booking.
yeah, because of Gedo's booking. I mean, yeah, he didn't seize the moment either, but it's
Look,
you
it's
have
funny because I'll give some, so we'll have to, just because people don't pay enough attention to him and hand wave them, find it up. But Red Narita would have been better off just cosplaying as Shibata and eventually finding his own roots than being stuffed into this heel faction. I'm
yeah.
utterly
Well,
convinced of
that's
that.
that's part of my issue, which is like I don't think Ren Narita was a bad wrestler at all. It wasn't like, oh, he wasn't like he was Yujiro, where it's just like, man, there's really not much you can do with this
Yeah.
guy. In apparently he's employed for life. So let's just use him as like a bottom feeding heel that does a lot of interference spots and is in multi-man tag matches and things like that. Ren Narita was like, all right, we're gonna push this guy as like he's the son of strong style. We're gonna have a cosplay of a Shibata. It didn't work. I at the time said this isn't working. I think he's gonna try something else. But by what they did with him, which is what they do with a lot of people, which is like, you know what, you're just gonna be like a shitty heel. You're gonna have your push up, or no, that's wait, no, does Ren Narita have the push up bar? No, that's Yo. Or Show has the push up bar.
Show.
Does Ren Narita have his own little whatever. He's a shitty heel, who's going to be in House of Torture, and it's like, all right, this is what your career is going to be because House of Torture is never going to go away, nor is its philosophy going to change. So this is your lot. In the next few years, you're just going to be a guy who has interference-laden matches that people skip over. Um, and there was a path where Ren Narita's career was. Uh, not didn't go that way, where he was repackaged in a different way that was nice, and his career could take off. Because, like I say, it's not like he's a bad, incompetent wrestler where this is all he can do. But this is now, once his kind of initial kind of push didn't really take, they're like, all right, well, we're giving up. This is all you can do now. Bye.
Yeah, it's kind of sad in a lot of ways because, well, I mean, Narita is, I can't remember how old Narita was, but he was definitely at a younger phase in his career than when they initially turned show. I mean, him and Yo are getting up there in years, and I think they're a lot older than people.
Hmm.
And it's just like, well, especially with show. I mean, if you go back, I remember like 2019 Best of the Super Junior finals were Osprey versus Shingo, but Show was like just also like incredible talent. Everyone's like, this man is the future of the junior division. And then fast forward and look where he is now.
Yeah, do you remember the DDT match where it was Hiroshi Tanahashi and is it Yohei Komatsu
Yep.
um, versus I think it was Takeshita who was 19 or something like that, and I think it was oh, what was his name? I can't remember. His DDT
Was it
guy.
Hiroshima?
No, it wasn't Harashima. It was someone much worse than Harashima. I'm trying to remember his name now. Um, I literally remembered it while I was thinking, like, oh, I'm gonna make this point when Gerard stops talking, and now I can't remember what his name is. That's a bad one. Anyway, classic DDT's Punch Tamaniga guy. That's
Oh,
who I think of him as.
no, it was Hiroshima and Ken Oka versus Hiroshi.
Oh yes, it's Ken Oka. Yeah, you're right. It's not
Yeah.
Takeshita. It was Ken Oka. I like how you when I said DDT's version of Punch Tomanika, you immediately knew who I was talking about. It's a bad description of Ken Oka. But anyway, like Yo was there as a young lion, basically there to take the fall because Tanahashi's not taking the fall, and they wanted to put the
Yeah.
DDT guys over. But it was like this great match, and I was like, whoa, Yo's gonna be good. And the Show and Yo tag team was a good junior heavyweight tag team. It got kind of repetitive because there's not a lot of changes to that division. There's never been an enormous amount of depth or anything like that. So once you're kind
Well,
of the top tag team, you're the top tag team forever. But um
that's one of the other flaws
mhm.
that's always been in Ghetto's booking. Uh, I think the junior division generally has not been. I don't know if he's booking it or who's booking it, but I think the quality of the booking in that division has gone down and was going down a while ago before the problems. And the utter lack of attention to either of the tag team belts, given Ghetto's own history as a tag team wrestler. Uh, these are the sort of things that if you don't invest in them at all times, they're not there for you to lean on in when times are tough. And I think that's really the case for in New Japan. There's no other like divisions in the mid card that can help prop it up, even if things aren't so hot up top.
Yeah, I mean that's always been a criticism of Gedo. I remember arguing with people like in 2016, 2017 when people like, yeah, I don't think Gato's that great of a booker. Look at what he's done with it. He doesn't book the tag team division well. He doesn't book the junior tag division well. And I'm like, what are you guys idiots? Gato, who cares about those divisions? Like I'm watching, Kenny Omega versus Okada. But obviously, as you said now, with when you don't have the kind of strength in the heavyweight division, the book, it's not like there's always been a tremendous creative effort put into those smaller divisions, and now you have that nothing to lean on when the heavyweight division is a little bit leaner. You mentioned like uh, you know the effectiveness of like replacing Kenny Omega as soon as AJ Styles left, and kind of what that did. AJ Styles leaves in January of 2016. Do you know who wins the G1 in 2016, Gerard?
Kenny Omega.
Kenny Omega wins the G1 and he gets his big push. Kenny Omega didn't finish like in the middle of the pack in the G1. Kenny Omega, they didn't spend years trying to get Kenny Omega ready to then take on the mantle. They had the opportunity. Kenny Omega's going to replace AJ Styles and we're going to push him to the moon. And I think that's a huge difference from a lot of these other younger guys who they've been afraid to pull the trigger on for whatever reasons. Now, granted, none of these guys have been as polished as Kenny Omega was in 2016 with the kind of experience that Kenny Omega had. He's a generational talent, but they haven't had the same kind of urgency that they had in previous incarnations when they needed to make a new star, and that has severely hurt it. It's hurt Aminu a ton. It's hurt Yoda Suji a ton. We'll see what happens with Gabe Kidd, who seems to be, it's like kind of, oh, now it's maybe Gabe's kid's turn to grab the mantle. Who knows? I think what happens in this G1 will be really telling. Who they decide to to win this G1, because I think there's no obvious winner from a veteran's perspective. It's got to be one of those younger guys. Otherwise, what are we doing here? But I just don't know what they're going to do. But I think it's really hurt these more recent younger, participants that really needed to be elevated and just haven't been there.
Yeah. So there was a like people would talk maybe a year or two ago, and they would look at we'll just call them the Reiwa Three Musketeers. But when I say that, I could also encompass like the Red Naritas and the Ryohei Oiwas, that generation, so to speak. Um, a year within the last year or two ago, people would be like, "Oh well, Ghetto's got a plan. Ghetto's got a plan." And no, I don't think Ghetto ever had a plan. I don't think that the Umino bombing. Uh, well, first of all, Umino bombing should not have affected the others, which makes me think that he did not really have much of a plan for the others. And and it just is way more. It just sticks out even more because of what Noah did with Ozawa. Ozawa was a rookie. He had never won a match. He goes off on his excursion. They bring him back. They immediately put him in the main event, have him beat Kaito Kiyomiya for the title in the Nippon Budokan on January 1st on their biggest show of the year. A star was born. Business immediately spikes. Now, I can tell you, I have many not nice things to say about Team 2000X, but I still voted for Ozawa as my number one on my 30 under 30 ballot because I just think the world of what he can be and what he has proven to be for business. And sometimes, no matter how meticulous you want to plan, because it's clear that Gedo has these plans and he moves them around. Like, look at the David Finlay push. You knew that that was something that he had always planned, and then you get to a certain date and he moves up David Finlay because people talked about, oh, Sonata is going to get pushed, and some people I think gave up on Sonata getting ever pushed, and then Sonata get pushed. Now, was that a good idea in hindsight? Well, probably not. But it's just like he has had these longer term plans in the past, but it just seems completely lacking. And if so, it is very poorly planned out in comparison with his past long term plans that paid off. Sometimes in wrestling, yes, you want to build things long term so they can be sustained over the long term, but sometimes you just have to pull that trigger immediately, and that's what the situation and the timing calls for. And Gedo failed to do that.
Yeah, on my last show when I had Alan Forel on and we were talking about, various developmental patterns for young wrestlers across the wrestling world, and Alan said the young lion period in New Japan lasts a really long time. It probably lasts way too long, especially given the urgency of which new talent is needed in the promotion. And I think in general, like New Japan moves at a very gradual pace. And you mentioned that with like the David Finlay push, and we've seen a lot of wrestlers spend kind of years and years on the roster, slowly making their way up, and then Gedo elevates them, and everything comes together nicely, and you feel good about it. But there's also time for urgency that's really required. I mean, you mentioned Ozawa. I mean, who did Ozawa beat? He beat Kaito Kiyomiya, which felt like a really definitive win because Kiyomiya himself had been elevated over the last few years as like the top guy in Noah himself. So not only did you have Ozawa kind of elevated, you used a guy, you needed to have a guy to elevate Ozawa, which you only had because you had elevated Kiyomiya a few years earlier. Um, and with these New Japans, like these guys, like I have been watching Yoda Tsuji. When did he make his debut? Like 2018?
17 or 18. Like these guys are all like it's like let me put it this way. Go and look at guys like Ozawa, Kaito Kiyomiya, Yuma Aoyagi, Yuma Anzai. All of these
Yeah.
guys are still going to be on the 30 under 30 for a couple more years or just about to age out. Yuma Aoyagi won the Triple Crown for the first time in 2023, and he's just aged out or will maybe get one more year in as eligibility under 30. Yuma Anzai's only 26. Ozawa's only 26 or 27. Kiyomiya 27 or 28, right? These guys have already been at the top, elevated, and they still are not even 30 yet. But that's not the case
Yeah.
with Rewa
Like
Musketeer guys.
Yeah, like so Suji's 31, but Suji made his debut in 2018. I've been watching this guy for 7 years. And it's like I'm still waiting for him to be elevated to like this higher level at the top where I'm a big Suji fan. If he out of the three guys, he's definitely the guy I would choose to push. I think he's charismatic. I think he can have really exciting matches. He's maybe lacking a little bit here and there. He's not the world's greatest prospect, but I think he's my guy in terms of that grouping. And I'm just like waiting for him be elevated. And it's been years and years, and it's been such a slow burn where he had his young lion period, and then he had the pandemic, which delayed things. Then he went on an excursion, and then he came back, and then it seemed like they were really going to push him right away, right? He comes back and he gets that
Yeah,
great debut, and he gets that, that huge um match. And he joins LIJ, and he it's like, oh my God, Suji's gonna be like the next big star. They're going all the way with him. And that was in what, 2023? Um, so
yeah.
it's like that was almost, that's over 2 years ago now, and we're still kind of waiting for him to get elevated to that level. And it's not like New Japan is bursting at the seams with super exciting talent, and he just can't quite get, break into that spot. It's been a deliberate choice to be so gradual with him, and I think they've lost it. I thought they lost it with Umino. Like, I know a lot of people have problems with Umino in terms of just them not thinking he's any good. I've always been a little bit higher on Umino, but I think the way they went with Umino being so gradual with him just it waited longer and longer for people to kind of sour on him, to people kind of settle in and being like, I don't know if I really like this guy. This guy doesn't really pop off the page to me. And it's like, I think if they went super hard and pushed Amino as a world champion like 2 or 3 years ago,
Yeah.
I think it I don't know if it would have been like way, way better and he'd be a huge star today, but I don't think it would have been any worse than the route they went with, which is they basically waited for him to basically get stale as a babyface and then give him the Tokyo Dome main event. And of course, he doesn't have a good performance there, and now you're looking at him. He's seems like he's probably destined to be another shitty heel one day. But again, it was I think the gradual nature of the way New Japan uses these guys. Um, it also makes you less excited for these prospects. And just as a fan, like you might like what seeing a young lion, but you're also like, okay, in 5 years, this guy might get a serious push. Like that's forever in pro wrestling. Like you watch a young lion now, and you're like, oh, that guy looks like he has potential. Be like, oh, maybe in 2030 he can win the G1. And it's like that just seems it's hard to get that emotional investment in these guys because it just feels like they're still years and years and years away as we're still waiting on these guys to seize it.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to watch this crop flail a bit. I don't want to completely write them off, so I don't want to use language that's too harsh on them. And I agree with you with Umino. I think there's just a lot of things working against him, and I don't think it's necessarily like a bad wrestler at all. And he's been in some pretty good matches. But I mean, I suppose the one thing that New Japan does have going for them, and maybe we can say some nice things about them, is that they are still turning out consistently. Their dojo is still turning out talent, still turning out talent. And as far as I know, that is still a good dojo. You've got Yuji Nagata in there who's helped turn out so much great talent. So that's still a very strong fundamental thing that they have that, maybe every company has lost dojo generations, I add, because people will get injured young and then that will like sort of play they'll be injury plagued or it doesn't work out for personal reasons or something like that, but they just keep turning them out the same sort of way with Dragon Gate. They're probably New Japan and Dragon Gate are probably the most prolific dojo, in terms of graduating them, and I think that's a strong suit that's going to help you in these tough times. But sometimes you get a little worried about it if they don't know exactly what to do with those wrestlers. So yeah, I mean that's to me like the one fundamental that New Japan will have always going for them.
Yeah, I was thinking about Rohei Oiwa,
Well, see,
who
that's funny because I made a note and I'm like, in my notes for this, because it's a topic I want to talk about, is like, is Oiwa even a ghetto guy? And I don't know if he is.
so Oiwa, who a lot of people are high on, he made the Voice of Wrestling 30 under 30 list. And me and Alan talked about this. Like, if you look at like the write-ups for people who voted for Oiwa, a lot of them were like, Oiwa's really on here because of the work he did in Noah, because he went on excursion and he was,
Yeah.
given a pretty substantial position in Noah. He wasn't pushed to the moon, but he was
He was
presented.
Kaito Kiyomiya's tag team partner.
Yeah, I mean, he was presented stronger in Noah than he has ever been presented in New Japan, um, which is just so odd for a lot of reasons. And it's like, um, now he is like, okay, he's another guy who's, a promising young wrestler.
Yeah.
He's he's about to cross the 4 year mark of his career, and it's like it still just feels like he hasn't even, like, he got put in TMTK, and it's like, has he gotten any creative direction? Has he done anything this year really of note at all in New Japan? The answer is really no. And I mean, he's maybe going to make the G1. He still needs to
I
get
hope
past
so.
Satoshi Kojima. Now, so they brought Fale back at Dominion, and Fale seemed like he was gonna get like a renewed push.
Yeah.
Um, and so it was supposed to
Terrifying
be
everyone.
Fale versus uh Oiwa for this final spot in the G1, these qualifiers that they're having. Um and then Fale looks like he had a death in the family. It looks like he's gonna be missing some time. I do wonder if they wanted to have Fale in the G1 because it seemed like he was gonna get a big push, or at least a renewed push to some degree. As after doing this turn and being in House of Torture. Um and so I do wonder if they would have had Fale beat Oiwa. It might be actually to
Well,
Oiwa's benefit that Fale, unfortunately for Fale, obviously with the death in the family, is going to miss the tour.
yeah, I don't think Kojima's getting in the G1 because he's got other commitments globally, shall we say. Um, but
Hey, this
I mean,
G1 field could use some Satoshi Kojima.
oh, absolutely. Um, but I thought though, one thing I did think is like given all the circumstances, Owiwa might have just won by disqualification against Fale. And that's how they sort of get him in there without Fale taking
That
the
would have,
loss.
yeah, that would have got Oiwa over. That's what you want to do, right? When you're trying to get this
I
young
know,
guy
but
over.
this is also keeping in with the current booking of Ultimate Torture.
Yeah, I think that's probably a decent guess that is what would have happened. But he's another guy where it's like, and we talk about this like, again, New Japan has faced challenges, but these other Puro promotions have faced the same exact challenges, and they also do not have the resources that New Japan has
Exactly.
had, and do not have like the not even resources, but like the fan sentiment, like the benefit of the doubt that New Japan has had. And yet they've somehow been able to do it. Now, part of that is it's, I guess, like, I don't want to say it's easier to get younger talent over, but if you're like a Dragon Gate, for example, and your fans are kind of used to seeing this really heavy churn and these young guys get elevated pretty quickly, and there's maybe not as much pressure from, being corporately owned like Bushiroad to hit attendance numbers and things like that. So there's a little bit more when you're a little bit of a smaller promotion, there's a little bit more freedom to experiment in a way that maybe New Japan doesn't have. But all of these promotions have somehow been able to um elevate, find new people. Um, I mean, you might be better suited to talk about this than me, but I know that, Stardom, which is also owned by Bushiroad, has dealt with kind of a similar thing where they have lost a lot of their key talent that they've been built around. They had the whole split with some of their key talent going to Marigold. They've lost talent to both WWE and AEW, and yet they've been able to find young talent, train the young talent, and quickly elevate them. And it's something that's just really eluded New Japan.
So it's funny you bring up Stardom because I do see a bit of well, obviously they're both owned by Bushi Road, but what I sort of see happening to both companies is I'm how shall I put this? And because I don't want to come across as negative, I'm not quite as high on Stardom as a lot of other people are right now. That's not to saying I think they're bad or anything. No, they are a very good wrestling company. But what I see that has happened, especially you lose Nakano and Mayu Iwatani, what you have done though is you've sort of maintained your momentum, but it's because you have built the brand of Stardom. Much like New Japan, attendance has not fallen off a cliff because you are New Japan. You are the king of sports. You are, for the past 53 years, you've spent most of those as Japan's most successful and largest wrestling company, and at times the number two wrestling company on the entire planet. So, but I do still believe that professional wrestling, with the possible exception of WWE and what it's become, is still a star-driven business. And I think you can only get so far being the brand of New Japan or being the brand of Stardom, at some point you are going to have to find new stars. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but that's what I still believe, especially in the Japanese context.
Well, you've certainly seen it. You've seen some of the houses with Goto as champion have gone into decline since Naito left. And Naito's
Right.
obviously was easily, their biggest star. Um,
Well, the one thing about Naito leaving, yes, it's going to hurt attendance, especially in your smaller spots. Just the people in the small towns, they want to see Tetsuya Naito, one of the big stars ever in 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 history of Japanese wrestling. But what doesn't make sense, or what doesn't add to this argument that Gedo is facing these external problems, is Naito was already being cycled downwards because, you know, the condition that his body is in and the kind of performance he can get on. So yes, Naito is a hit to business, but the downcycling of Naito had already clearly been baked into the booking plans. And even then, Gedo did not have someone to come up and replace Naito as like one of the top stars of the company, right?
and Naito was really kind of like the last man standing in terms of like the huge drawing cards that was working main events. Because Tanahashi's still
Yeah.
around. This is a retirement tour, but Tanahashi had been phased down years ago.
Yeah.
Um, Away from the main event. And like Naito, like really, last year was just really running on fumes from an in-ring perspective, just working those main events, and doing the New Japan main event style and trying to work at the level that has people have become accustomed to. And the reason that New Japan has become so popular, and especially to Western fans, is that really high in-ring quality. And
Yes.
just it's tough when your body is the way it is.
Well, I mean, that's some of the reasons why like I could not handle rationalizations for what New Japan's direction was. It had set itself apart because of this quality in ring, and any deviation from that, I think, was always going to, at least among the international fan base, was always going to hurt them. No matter what kind of gimmick or character you came up with to replace, you were never going to replace the find a replacement for just high quality. In fact, the highest quality of professional wrestling on the planet.
Yeah, and definitely as they've lost some key talents and some talents aged out, the quality is still really high in certain ways, but it's not
Yes.
even close to what it was even like 2 or 3 years ago, let alone, 8 or 9 years ago. And I think a lot of the things were like when this G1 field came out, and a lot of people were like, "Ooh, this is the G1 field," and it's basically just the regular roster, no, um, you know, talent coming in from other promotions that we've seen in the last few years. And it's like, oh man, you look at these G1s, like, man, I'm not excited about a lot of these matches. And it's like, this is kind of what the roster is. And it's not filled, you know, with just a bunch of killer great workers anymore.
I've been thinking about this a lot recently, and much has been said about sort of a malaise across Japanese wrestling in general, which I agree there's a bit of one. I don't think these are insurmountable odds. I don't even think these are insurmountable odds for New Japan. Obviously, got Aaron Wolf coming in. But what I think has happened, and I think this is undeniable, and I'm sure some people will get angry when I say this, is that the attraction of Japanese professional wrestling was there was the Japanese wrestling advantage. It was always somehow going to be generally the best professional wrestling from an in-ring quality on the planet. We saw a lot of years of whatever the hell was going on in the United States and North America. Mexico was on and off. Mexico, at least for CMLL, up again. But Japan, I will say, for the past couple of years, is no longer putting out the best professional wrestling on the planet. That does not mean there's no match of the year candidates coming from Japan or anything like that. But I just don't think that guarantee that Japan is going to have the best in-ring matches by far of any other country on the planet has been the case, or has been the case for the past couple of years. And I think that's really the first time that I can remember, because even when you had some sort of darker eras of Japanese wrestling in, I don't know, like 2005 to 2010, those weren't always great years. With, again, there's always exceptions, right? But those weren't necessarily always great years in the United States. Yes, you had Ring of Honor, and then a little later on PWG, sure, but WWE not good. No other competition. Mexico ebbs and flows, right? I mean, some very lean years for CMLL just a couple of years ago before it picked up again, and then AAA has been whatever AAA has going on a while now. But to me, it just seems that who's really fallen the most is Japan, and that Japanese advantage is no longer there.
Well, you're touching on what I think has been is a really like fundamental root of why Japanese wrestling has become why it became popular outside of Japan.
Yes.
And I would say that whenever I explain to somebody who maybe doesn't watch professional wrestling at all, like, oh, like why are you watching, Japanese pro wrestling? Like what's the appeal to that? And I would always say, like, oh, the matches are way better, but that's not really a way to define it to somebody who doesn't really understand pro wrestling. But
Right.
what my de facto response would be, they take professional wrestling a lot more serious there. It's like
That's a great way of
treated
putting it.
like it's a
Yeah.
serious sport, and that this is, a real fierce athletic competition that's not watered down with like these over the top characters and storylines and Vince Russo bullshit. And when you have House of Torture and you have these storylines and all this interference and all this bullshit, it's hard to distinguish that from a lot of American pro wrestling these days. There's not that much to distinguish, at least with New Japan. Um, it isn't a company that takes professional wrestling super duper seriously. And I think that is where you're seeing, like, when you're talking about like the Japanese advantage, I would describe it as being it's treated more like a real sport. That's not the way New Japan seems to have been booked for a long time now.
No.
Um, and again, a lot of these problems with Gedo, like relying a lot on heel interference and stables sticking around for a long time and neglecting the tag team division and neglecting the junior division in some ways, that's all existed for a long time. And in a lot of ways, it's been glossed over by just having superior talents and really taking advantage of being the top dog in Japanese pro wrestling, and also taking advantage of the fact that American pro wrestling was really undervaluing some really key talents. So that a guy like Kenny Omega, who's one of the best wrestlers in the world, is available and, and easy to kind of bring in to your company. Or AJ Styles, WWE didn't want to sign AJ Styles. They didn't think he was worth it when he was, left TNA. So he went to New Japan almost as by default. So they had a lot of things going for them. That advantage is gone with the creation of AEW in a lot of ways. Um, and what you're seeing is just you're right about, like, I still really enjoy some of the high-end matches in New Japan, but the average match in New Japan even a big show, and I think Dominion was a perfect example of this, has really declined.
Yeah, the undercards are not as strong as they once were. Some of that was always going to happen, especially if you weren't going to use new stars. I mean, if you go back, I don't know, 2016, 2017, even Okada was busting his ass in six-man tags in the mid card. Of course, that wasn't going to last forever. Tom was going to come catch up with him and to the point where he was like, "Well, I could still have an incredible main event, but I got to conserve myself when I'm in Beppu or Fukuoka or some mid-size or smaller city or something like that. That wasn't going to last forever, but that just happened to be when they were peaking, and in the mid 2010s to mid to late 2010s, everybody was still like in great shape and really willing to put in a huge amount of effort even on small shows. And I think you notice those things, right? It's like it's an entire vibe, right? Like when a wrestling company is hitting on all cylinders, it's a vibe. Like from the matches to who comes out next to challenge at the end of a big show to be the next challenger. All of these things just add to the atmosphere and the memories. And when one of those things starts to sort of decay and fall apart, it just it just adds to the malaise when a company gets in a malaise and it gets into a rut. And these things are not insurmountable. I mean, small companies smaller than New Japan have gotten out of it, but it's just you can look at all of these things and just watch like a spot show in front of like 700-800 people from 2025 versus 2018 in New Japan, and I think you'll really see like I haven't done that, but I should. And I think you would really see what's sort of ailing the company in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's been a problem over the last few years. Now, some of that has been taken off of their hands, but there was a real problem with like dead weight in the promotion. Um, like the Gorillas of Destiny, those guys are dead weight. Fale, who is now unfortunately back, is dead weight. Chase Owens is kind of dead weight. Even guys that I kind of like Yoshihashi, right? He's not moving the needle anymore. Uh, and you look at this G1 that's coming up, and it's like even guys who I enjoy that I don't think are bad wrestlers, but just like, well, they haven't really done anything of significance for a long time in New Japan, and it just kind of feels like they're spinning their wheels. Like El Phantasmo is a good guy, is a good example. I like El Phantasmo. Think he's a very talented individual, has had some matches that I've enjoyed tremendously. It's hard to get a lot of excitement going for El Phantasmo 2025 G1 because he's been slotted in a certain way. He's been on my television screen for a long time now. Nothing has really changed all that much about him. Character hasn't evolved all that much. He's just not an exciting individual that makes me want to get excited about watching his matches, despite the fact that he's a pretty good pro wrestler. And I think there's just a number of guys like that. And there's other guys that just kind of have never put it together. Like a guy that I find really intriguing is Okan, who I have always had this kind of hot and cold um relationship with him where like I was really excited with when he was a young lion. And then I didn't really like his character during his excursion. And then when he came back and it was clear he was going to be heavy heel shtick. And then at times he's broken out of that character and he's been exciting. And I'm like, okay, here's like the cool ass kicking native Japanese wrestler. It's going to be like really exciting. And then but he just seems like he's gotten lazy and he's reverted to this being his state. And he's now like kind of one of those dead weight guys where it's like, oh, that big Okan push probably is never going to happen. He hasn't seized any opportunity that's been presented to him to justify it. And also, Gedo doesn't really seem like he's ever going to elevate any of these guys. And it's like, okay, am I excited for Okan in this B block? Am I going to get excited for this like Great Okan Shota Amino match that might be on one of these shows? Like, probably not. And I just think there's a lot of guys right now on the roster that are like that.
Yeah, Okan's a fascinating case because, um, I think people had expected he seemed to be a sort of management favorite at one point, and I just think the gimmick just really ended up hurting him in the long term. The Mongolian thing, I don't know. He does like at times like he has had great matches, but not enough. He's also shown like great charisma at times, but I just don't think it's all there. And for despite the fact that I've
He's
thought that,
gotten very he himself has gotten very complacent. I
yeah,
think the talent is there, but that consistency is not. And I think a lot of it comes down to him knowing that being introduced, working a gimmick, right? He gets
yeah,
introduced back into New Japan Pro Wrestling after being a young lion, and he is a gimmick where he's not going to do a lot of cool moves. He's going to be doing, the Mongolian chops. He's going to be doing like a few of these like, mock poses and things like that. But he was never even really given a chance, I think, to just be, Tomoyuki Yuka, big hoss amateur wrestler that's going to give people belly to belly suplexes, which is what I thought he was going to be when he was a young
yep.
lion. Never even given that opportunity. He's slotted in as this gimmick, and he's kind of learned over time, like, this is all I gotta really do. Okay, that's what I'm gonna do. And it's been very disappointing because I think he has the talent to be great.
Same similar thing with Show. The game, well, I mean, he started off very promising, even more promising than Okan in a lot of ways. Got saddled with the gimmick. Although the bad gimmicks are are there, but they're not as I would say severe as what's hurting the company as just not pushing some of the other young talent more properly, right? Um, that to me is a bigger thing than just some bad gimmicks.
Yeah, I mean, I think like with the instance for Okan, it's like so with Show and Yo, like they come back. Show comes back from excursion. He's paired with Yo, junior heavyweight, tag team, and they have a good run where they have exciting matches. The tag team gets stale and they do the split, and then things kind of fall off the rails for both of them. But at least
They're
they were
both Marty
given,
Jannetty.
yeah, the two Martys. Um, the issue, and like with Okan though, he didn't even get, I think, a real chance to be the kind of killer he needed to be because Gedo came up with this idea, assuming Gedo came up with the idea for him to be this, do the Mongolian gimmick, the Killer Khan, Killer Khan 2.0 kind of gimmick. Um, and he's was never really given a chance to be like just like I don't know, just like a regular wrestler, but like just like a standard New Japan guy. Instead, he's always been this gimmick, and he's been mostly tag team work, and there's been flashes that are there. But at the end of the day, I think he's just this guy who understands I'm doing this gimmick, and that's what's going to keep me a job for a long time, and that's what he's going to do. And he's not motivated to do anything better, and the booking hasn't given him any motivation to get better.
No, I mean, and it's a shame. You run into these cases. I mean, I think they happen less in Japan than they do maybe in other countries, but they're still there, and it's still sort of sad to see. And I uh, I really got over Okan a while ago, even though there were people thinking that, oh, maybe just around the corner, it he's the push is gonna happen and that sort of thing. But that was something that I gave up at quite some time ago, despite the fact that people were really convinced that he was going to get a huge push. But I just felt like that ship had sailed a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean, we're still waiting on it, and he's, joined a list of guys who are maybe going to get a huge push one day. Um, but I think even the most optimistic Okan fans have have come to grips with the fact that this is what he is. He's going to get, 6 or 8 points, in the G1. He might have like one like pretty like, 4.25 star match where people are like, Okan, yeah, remember he's still capable of this, but he's just not there. And that's just another guy who I think on paper as a homegrown talent who's should be in his prime right this second, just hasn't worked out for him in that way.
Yeah, I mean, especially with his pedigree, I expected more. But in some ways, when did Okan return? Was it 2018, 2019? Or was it later than that?
Yeah. No, it's before the pandemic, I think.
If it's before, yeah, so it's funny because I think maybe Okan was sort of the canary in the coal mine.
He comes
And
back on October 16th, 2020. So it was during the
oh,
pandemic.
okay. That's interesting. For some reason, I thought he was back before then.
And he
But
had
I
been
think,
doing the Great Okan gimmick since June 30th of 2018 when he was working in the UK Indies. So he's do that gimmick for a really long time before he came back.
yeah, that's funny. But I will still stand by my canary in the coal mine comment because, yes, people were down about New Japan at that time because of the evil title reign, or starting to anyway. But, Akan is the big first return, even in the pandemic era. In some ways, his fizzling should have set off more alarm bells for what's going to happen to Suji and Umura and
Yeah, I mean, those guys have been. I mean, there definitely is. They didn't go quite as far with some of these guys, though. It looked like for Suji for a second he was going to be really like he was going to be like a wrestling dinosaur almost at some point. Um, but they are kind of in this phase where like we bring our young lions back who have been on excursion for a while and have been around wrestling for years and years now, and we give them kind of like a wacky gimmick. And then they show up and like they got to kind of overcome that wacky gimmick or that wacky packaging, and it hasn't worked for really any of them.
no. I mean, they remember like Umino was the classic, like, oh, the kids love him type thing, and that just totally bombed. I think it's less severe with Umura and Suji, though. They're more like their personas are extensions of themselves as opposed to trying to be too hard to either, do a silly gimmick or be someone that they're really not. I mean, I would say that I still have. I'm never like a doomer generally, unless things get really bad and they'd have to be a lot, actually, in fact, to be a lot worse than they are. So I still have a certain amount of hope in Suji and in Yumura. And I think like sometimes looking back over, you know, wrestling history in Japan and even New Japan's um own history, one of the interesting things is like, okay, so Enochiism falls apart, the company's on death's door. What happens? Well, they bring Riki Choshu back to do booking. I think it's in late '05 or '06. And so he books for a couple of years before they give it to Gedo. And of course, you know, at the end of the '90s and the beginning of 2000s, Choshu's booking had run out of a lot of steam. And when I started watching Puro, that was a big topic of debate because, you know, people were feeling that Choshu's booking was beginning to really suffer after the fact that he had successfully elevated the Three Musketeers in the early '90s. So, you know, I'm actually saying that maybe Gedo could be pulled and return to booking one day down the line after several years of not booking. But just sort of the thing is, you got to sort of go back to. But what Choshu did to stabilize New Japan was just meat and potatoes, basic, simple professional wrestling. But he also had Tanahashi, obviously, coming up at that time, a once in a generational talent, to be fair. But, you know, if I were booking, I would just do something chalk like Suji wins the G1 and beats Goto in the Tokyo Dome, and you just have to run with that and get him up there, right? Nothing flashy, nothing fancy, just do what's the most logical next step.
And it's okay if Suji doesn't sell out the Tokyo Dome in his first
Exactly.
Tokyo Dome main event.
Because I don't think he's
Um,
going to be as, I don't think he's going to be sort of get sort of the same toxic reactions that, you know, Dick got.
what if instead of Naito, like just kind of leaving the company on his retirement tour, Suji turned on Naito and like beat the shit out of him and took over as the leader of LIJ as a heel. And then you like put the world title on him, have him beat the shit out of Goto and win the world title.
That works. I have no problem with that.
Like that would be it would that would keep the LIJ branding, which is important apparently for New Japan, but also like you really do something with a promising young wrestler, which is like okay, this is the time for Suji to go all we're gonna go all the way hard with him, and instead they kind of go 50% with a lot of these guys.
Yeah. My only concern with that is that Naito is such a beloved character that I'm not sure that not doing some sort of resolution to that turn would necessarily be a good idea.
Well, a lot of people think Naito is gonna he hasn't wrestled his last match in New Japan.
Yeah,
is
no,
is a
I
common belief.
I could totally believe that.
I'm
Well,
just tossing that out as like an idea of like, okay, that is an example of what I would consider to be like a really aggressive booking
oh,
measure to try to
absolutely. Yeah.
create a new talent as opposed to whatever they're gonna do now. I mean,
Well,
the G1 is fascinating in the sense of I really don't know who's going to win it. Um, and it'll be really kind of interesting to see who they decide is going to win it. And if they have the confidence in that person to go in as the Tokyo Dome main event because does it seem like Goto is now that he's made it to the G1 as champion that like Goto is gonna just hold the title all the way until Wrestle Kingdom and he's gonna main event Wrestle Kingdom, which is
uh,
extremely unlikely when like last year if you were to tell me next year Hiroki Goto is the main event of Wrestle Kingdom, but it seems like it's a distinct possibility right now.
I think at this point you just sort of do it. I mean, have they said that they're going to do the title match for the G1 winner at Wrestle Kingdom?
They haven't, and obviously they set the precedent last year where that's not going
Yeah.
to be a thing. But that, I mean, my expectation would be that the winner of the G1 is going to wrestle at the Tokyo Dome. That obviously doesn't have to happen. But I mean, usually when the champion, who the person who's the champion in the G1 climax usually tends to hold on to that title until the Tokyo Dome. They'll lose a couple times in the G1 to set up matches for the fall for title defenses in the fall, and then they'll be. But it's usually the title is on I don't know like a more established drawing card than Goto. So, um, but who
It's
would you
fun.
put in it right now? Like you look at the roster, like okay, you do also have it's going to be Tanahashi retirement. So that's probably going to be the big attraction on the Dome
Yeah.
anyway. So you don't necessarily need to have the biggest match, but like right now, if you were like, okay, looking at the landscape of New Japan, who would you main event the Tokyo Dome with? And it's like Goto he's the world champion. He's had the best year out of a lot of guys in New Japan, so he kind of is that guy. And it's I love Goto. I'm really enjoying the run that he's had this year. He would be placing very highly on my wrestler of the year ballot if we were handing them in today. But he is not. Uh, a guy that you're really, I think, excited about to have as the headlining act at Wrestle Kingdom.
There's nobody else though. That's the thing. And it's funny because I've never been particularly wedded or enjoyed the whole once they started doing the G1 winner gets the title shot in the Tokyo Dome. I thought that was too convoluted, too much space in between the title shot.
Yeah.
But under the current circumstances, I would just go for it because you gotta just pick your guy, and I would just do Suji wins and then faces go to on January 4th in the Tokyo Dome. And that's just what you do. Just stay the course. Have your established veteran in Goto put over the young guy to win the IWGP World title for the first time and just go from there.
Mhm. Obviously, like the role that AEW, and to a lesser extent WWE, but clearly AEW is the company that is most likely to sign away some of your promising talent or really any of your talent. Um, And that's something that New Japan has kind of had to grapple with. Obviously, they lost Will Ospreay and Okada being the two most significant departures. And now you even see like the tone a lot of fans had about Gabe Kidd drastically changed when he started appearing on Dynamite a little bit more regularly. All of a sudden, people are saying, well, Gabe Kidd's the next foreigner to leave. Um, and that is something that New Japan is going to have to grapple with, which is the kind of odd relationship where they have a working relationship with New Japan. AEW has, they do the joint show every year, which is a huge success. They, did a second Tokyo Dome show this year, which was a success. They've got obviously some key talent, like wrestlers like Kenny Omega, um, who are huge drawing cards for you, and you can use them on some of your shows for big shows. Um, so there's benefits to it, but there's also this kind of elephant in the room is that, especially when it comes to your foreign talent, they're going to go to AEW or they're going to go to WWE. That's just a reality. Like Gabe Kidd will not be wrestling for New Japan Wrestling full time in 5 years. I'm like pretty confident about that. And I'm also feel the same way about like a guy like Callum Newman.
You're probably right. Although, whenever I approach these things, I like to look at historical perspective. Foreigners have always come and gone.
Yep.
Foreigners have always used to jump between companies in Japan often, and they still sort of do to a certain extent. People like Francesco Akira, started
Mhm.
in All Japan. So I don't put too much worry about that. But there's also guys like Zack Sabre Jr. and I would say Chris Brooks and DDT. Those guys just love being wrestlers in Japan, and they're not going to leave. I don't think maybe Zach will leave at some point when he's like 40 or something, but I don't think he's on the cusp of leaving. There's guys like that that come along every so often. You
Yeah,
can
I mean, yeah, each guy is interesting. I think in terms of Gabe Kidd, who's a young guy who a
yeah,
lot of people feel like has real superstar potential, is someone that people are going to wave a lot of money in front of, that
for
it
sure.
becomes hard to turn them down.
For sure. I don't want to deny that this is an issue, but I have always taken this approach that you cannot let we have been through this. We've talked about this many times in the Emerald Flowshow because both All Japan and Noah over the past couple of years have had their brushes with like WWE.
Mhm.
And some people really do about that sort of thing. And we're like, no, it's not going to happen. They're not going to destroy Japanese professional wrestling. And I don't think that AEW signing away a lot of New Japan talent is going to destroy New Japan, especially if you're smart about that, especially if you're cultivating talent. Not everyone is going to be like an Okada who could have like the crossover appeal in North America or other places globally. So I think there's that one thing you have going for you. So to me, it's something that, yeah, it's there, but cannot let it consume you and how you think about Japanese wrestling. Um, that being said, look, you don't have to push foreigners. Like this, the thing is, like Japanese wrestling has always been so dependent on foreigners to a certain extent. Some companies have been more dependent on them at times. I don't think there's a company that has a lot like there was a large gap of years and years and years where like in the 80s, yes, New Japan, All Japan, both very reliant on your foreigners, Stan Hansen, Lucha Brody. They were main eventers, they were champions. And then it sort of goes into this lull. And then New Japan, again, once it gets bigger, it becomes actually quite reliant on foreigners. And that's a big part of Ghetto's booking. So, I mean, you could also just rely less on foreign talent. That's also an option too. Even though you've had some of the greatest wrestlers of all time pass through as foreign talent in New Japan in the last decade, I get that. But it is a choice. You do not have to do that. And maybe you just have to sort of take that into account and just don't rely on be like, I'm going to take this guy, even if he's a foreigner, and even if you train in our dojo, like Gabe Kidd did and Jay White did. Just be like, we're going to have them and we're going to feature them. If they get over, that's great, but not necessarily build a company around them. Like in some ways that Ghetto had with some of those foreigners. That's always an option
Yeah.
too.
Yeah, and I think part of the whole, I think the Gabe Kidd discussion, a lot of that comes down to the fact that Kidd has, in a lot of ways, lapped his Japanese contemporaries in terms of
Yeah.
young guys in New Japan. So it's like there's an excitement there in the sense of like, oh, Kidd is going to be the next guy for New Japan. But though there's always a looming question, it's like, well, once he gets really big, then he'll be off to North America. That seems the likely end game. Maybe not. Maybe he wrestles in Japan for his entire life, but
I don't
this
think
is
so.
a bit. I mean, look, it's like, and I know like he loves New Japan. He's got all that stuff. He came up in the dojo, and it's the wrestling business. And the reality is, there's just a lot more money to be made for these guys, who in a lot of cases have a short period of time to try to make as much money as possible.
Yeah.
Um, and so there's that's part of the angst too, which is like Kid is I think more charismatic than a lot of the Reiwa generation guys. And so there's a feeling like, oh, it's going to be extra frustrating because Kid is the standout young guy in the company right now, and he's probably not long for New Japan. As opposed to some of these other guys who you can expect to anchor, who in theory would be anchoring the company for the next 10 years.
Well, let me put it this way. I mean, I think David Finlay could get a job in the States if he wanted to, but he's not going to get anywhere near of a push that he would in New Japan. And at
Yeah.
the same time, I don't think there's that much demand for him. And I mean, like him, I think he's an underrated in some ways. At the same time, I don't think he could really partly build the company around him either.
He's been headed to NXT for about a decade now.
Yes, he has.
He's one day he's gonna get there. This is like Mike Bennett, who eventually did make it to WWE. Like Mike Bennett was rumored to be going to WWE for what felt like 10 years on the US Indies. And then he eventually did. Um, but it was always like, oh, Mike Bennett, I think honestly it was just because he had a good body, like on the US Indies in like the early 2010s. And it was like, oh, he's going to WWE. Oh, he's such a WWE guy. Oh, but this is, he can't really push him because he's going to be going to WWE. And I feel like that's kind of similar to Finlay. Like Finlay's been about to go to WWE like for a decade now, pretty much ever since he debuted in New Japan. Um,
Yeah, the
uh,
people just thought he was in the dojo just to get training and then he would take off once the training was over. And maybe he put in a year or two, right?
yeah. Yeah, that was the kind of idea, and obviously his, with his family connection and things like that
Yeah.
to WWE. The well, I guess we'll close talking a little bit about Aaron Wolf. I don't have a lot of expectations for Aaron Wolf based kind of on what this discussion that we've had is, and I understand he's probably going to be a special case. I don't think he's going to be going on excursion. I don't think he's going to be like Shota Aminu and you know, uh, living in an apartment in Portsmouth, England, with a bunch of like college students or something like that. Uh, and like, okay, maybe they'll push him. I guess my point with him is like, okay, he could potentially be a big star. I really couldn't, I really don't understand the context of like how popular of a celebrity he is in Japan. So like just like putting him on the marquee will draw fans to New Japan. I just don't know. I don't know enough about his star power in Japan. Um, but I mean, until he starts wrestling, I just don't know. But obviously, he's someone that that if you're looking at New Japan, like who is a big star that they're gonna push, like it almost feels like he's like almost a Hail Mary play if you're gonna drop him right into the company and give him a monster push, but maybe he takes off. So he's kind of like a lingering question mark to me.
So I have reasonably high expectations for Aaron Wolf. Um, but I'll get to some of the downsides in a second. Olympic judo gold medalist for Japan. He has gotten a lot of media attention. The head Takaki Kidani at the press conference, which makes me think that management is going to be watching his push very closely and probably are going to expect certain things. And I think that management has been generally hands off with Gedo's booking. As far as I can tell, I don't know. Maybe people know more than I do about that, but that's just the vibe I get. But I think they would intervene to make sure that Aaron Wolf will be being pushed properly. He's going to get a fast push. Now, there's also downsides. There's been people in the past, Hiroshi Wajima, Koji Kitao, to a certain extent, Naoya Ogawa, although he drew pretty big at the beginning of his career. And then there's also Shinsuke Nakamura, where he started off hot, but then he just like was good, but did not have all of the tools to be a main eventer, even though he was basically a main eventer instantaneously. And I talked about it before. He started in the main events, won the IWGP title very fast, and then sort of like floundered, shall we say, for a few years there until he reinvented himself. So yeah, it's not a guarantee, but they are going to push Aaron Wolf very hard. I don't know if they have fast tracked him for the IWGP title, but it would not shock me if he wins it within like 2 years. It's not going to surprise me if he somehow wins his debut match, depending on who it is against. Um, and so they're going to try him and they are going to try to make him the new ace. What actually is to me the biggest red flag as a long-term ace for Aaron Wolf is this man has been talking with Okada. Okada told him to go and learn in the New Japan dojo to learn the business. If Okada's in his ear, though, that is no guarantee that this guy is going to stay
People
with New
are
Japan over the long
already
term.
people are already dooming that he's going to be leaving too. Won't
Well,
even debut for 6 more months, and he's
no,
already on headed out the door to Tony
I don't
Khan.
I don't want to come across as too much dooming, but there was another company that everyone thinks is WWE that was interested in. Um, he is, half Japanese, half American. I assume he speaks English. I don't know that for sure. Uh,
So I read that his father teaches English at a Japanese university. He's an American
okay,
and
well
teaches
then,
English. So
then
it would
he
be
must
very
certainly,
shocking if he didn't
yeah.
speak
So
strong
he's,
English at that.
yeah, he speaks English. But to me, the red siren going off in this is that he has a relationship already with Kazuchika Okada, right? And Okada can tell him that you could make how much more money you can make in the United States as a pro wrestler and then in Japan. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm sure that he's getting a very nice salary from Bushi Road. And I'm sure that they are going to try and do things to keep him and make him a big star. I'm just simply saying, if he's talking to someone that was a big star in New Japan that made the jump to America to make even millions of dollars, that's something that has to be taken in consideration in the medium to long term. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying it as a doomer that he's going to end up for sure in the United States in 2 years. Absolutely not. I'm thinking like more to 5 to 7, if that happens even. Right.
He'll be wrestling Mark Briscoe on an episode of Collision in no time. Just you wait, Gerard. He yeah, like I said, like I don't have like really high just because I don't know what he's gonna be like. Like he's gonna be under the microscope. Obviously, he's making his debut at Wrestle Kingdom. There's much fanfare with his debut in a way that like very opposite of what we see with normal New Japan guys, which is the young lions kind of make their debut in the dark matches or opening the show, and they work these basic 5 minute matches. It looks like, he's going to not only, make his debut Wrestle Kingdom, he's probably going to get like, a big entrance, and I don't think he's gonna be wearing the black tights. I don't think his finish is going to be a Boston Crab. I think he is, he's going to get a significant push in. And the fact that he is like the star power, and you mentioned Kadani being at the press conference, maybe that forces Gedo to be more urgent than he wants to. Maybe Gedo really is like, man, I want to send this guy on an excursion and then come back, he'll come back and things like that. Maybe it forces them to be a little bit more aggressive. I just, I don't know. I keep hearing people say like, oh, he's really charismatic. And that may be true, but being charismatic in one sense and being charismatic in a professional wrestling sense is very different. And
Yeah,
I've seen
absolutely.
like I think of like Rob Gronkowski, who is like everyone was like, oh, he'll be a natural at pro wrestling because he's Gronk. He's like a really charismatic football player. And then he was like, in WWE for a brief period of time. It's like, oh, his charisma doesn't translate at all. And that happens a lot. And with these guys like like you mentioned, Nakamura is like actually a good example in the sense of like you mentioned, you brought already kind of highlighted his early career history where he gets like this super push as this, he's the super rookie, wins the world title, all that kind of stuff like that. And then he kind of flounders, and a lot of that comes from not because he wasn't a quick learner, or wasn't that he was a bad wrestler when he was getting this big push, but like it takes years and years of just being a professional wrestler to understand like how to pivot, how to present your character, how to get over with the audience, all these kind of things that may be independent of just winning a lot of matches. And it takes time for wrestlers to learn that. And that's something I'd also be apprehensive about, just like giving a super rookie a giant push. But like I said, he's a big question mark to me. He could come out and he could be amazing, could be a total natural pro wrestler, and he's like Kurt Angle or someone like that. Um, I'm sure he's going to be well trained. It's not like he's going to, you know, be one of these like people that you see on like these women's wrestlers in WWE NXT where they seem like they don't know how to run the ropes even correctly. I'm sure he's going to be very fundamentally solid when he debuts, and I'm sure they'll have him. Who would you have him wrestle at the Tokyo Dome?
Um, Possibly Yuji Nagata.
Yeah,
I think
so like a
Nagata is
veteran,
a
like a real
veteran.
old, like a dad, like an old veteran wrestler.
I would also consider consider putting him in it. I mean, some wrestlers debut in tag matches. I would consider putting
Yeah.
him in Bolton Oleg against Nagata and someone else.
Yeah, Oleg's an interesting guy too because I don't know if he'll ever get all the way there in like terms of like physical charisma, kind of connecting with an audience connection and things like that.
I always say this about Bolton. If this were 1982, he'd already have been main eventing Sumo Hall against Antonio Inoki. No question in my mind. No question
Yeah,
in my mind. But
with a Russian gimmick.
for sure. But it's not that. And I think getting the Never title, beating Takeshin for that is a big deal. But it always at the back of the mind lingers. I don't know if Gedo sees him like I do, or how people in the past in the wrestling business in Japan would have. Because
Well, and this
I
also,
would definitely earmark him for big things if I were booking the fight.
yeah, if Inoki was in charge, Bolton Oleg would be. So you were bashing Inokiism, but it kind of sounds like you want Inokiism to kind of come back when it comes to evaluating Big Bolton here.
I think what I like, I do not like putting wrestlers into shoot fights or MMA. But I do like wrestlers with legitimate combat backgrounds learning to be professional wrestlers and becoming professional wrestlers.
Like, yeah,
I think that's a big difference.
I think he is going to potentially be an outstanding individual professional wrestler. I like I said, crowd like I'm worried about like crowd connection and physical charisma and him that being the thing that kind of keeps him from being like a amazing professional wrestler that can headline the Tokyo Dome. But
Mm-hmm.
he's very, very good. And he, especially when you compare it to this roster, like when we were talking about like earlier, like in Japan, they take pro wrestling seriously, like it's a real sport. You want to know who
Yeah.
feels like he takes it seriously and it's a real sport, and when he gets in there and he looks the part, is Bolton Oleg. He's a perfect guy for
That's
that.
and that's a guy that knew nothing about professional wrestling.
Yeah, I mean he's kind of like you said, like you would have him tag with Aaron Wolf. Like he's kind of, well, now Bolton kind of went through a more I think like typical in a lot of ways Young Lion period. It looks like Wolf
Yeah.
is gonna kind of get a big push, but is kind of a similar kind of like like a celebrity signing to a degree. He obviously wasn't a real celebrity, but he was a highly acclaimed amateur wrestler that they're like, look, we got this guy and he's going to be someone we're gonna,
If
pretty
I'm
seriously
not
push.
mistaken, he was one of the first. He was the first Japanese gold medalist in judo at the Olympics in quite some time, I think. So there's like a lot riding on him from that sort of aspect.
Yeah, like I said, I can't really speak to how big of a
Yeah.
celebrity he is in Japan. I'm not gonna pretend to be like, oh, well, he's got, I saw this and that. But like obviously, and judo is obviously a big sport in Japan, and any Olympic gold medalist, especially I believe he won the medal at the 2020/2021 games in
Yeah,
Tokyo.
not the most high profile um, games globally, but he was going to always get attention in Japan for that feat.
You know, WWE has an Olympic gold medalist wrestler that they like do like absolutely nothing with, and she's been training for like
Tamara
2 years.
Tamara
Yeah,
Mensah-Stock.
I totally forgot about
And
her. And then like I think
I
Griffin
can't remember
posted,
the name. They gave her a name, a different name.
yeah,
I can't believe
they
it.
gave her a different name. She
Yeah,
should just
wow.
be like, yeah, just that's craziness. Yeah, Aaron Wolf. Now Aaron Wolf kind of already has an NXT name based on his shoot name.
Yeah.
Um, but like he's like if he was in NXT, they'd be giving him a new name. God forbid you
Rick,
Google this person and be like, oh my God, I
Rick,
didn't know this person.
he could be Rick Cougar.
I was thinking Wolf would be okay, but they'd give him like a really strange, like perhaps out of date first name. Like his name would be like
Yeah.
Jedediah Wolf or something like that. All right, Gerard, we're gonna wrap up. Do you have anything you want to plug? Any recent episodes of the Emerald Flow Show?
Yeah, we just recorded earlier today, which is June 26th. So that episode's going to be coming out probably right around the same time that this episode drops. We talked about the finals of the Big Japan Strong Climb tournament. So we covered Big Japan for the first time in like a year because, well, not much happens in Big Japan these days. We went over a bunch of going ons in Noah with their Monday Magic shows, which are always a very fun and unpredictable sort of weekly show that they do. And then we continue to talk about recent title matches in All Japan and continue to talk about what is going on with this promotion, what are they doing, and why this Jun Saito title reign has to end soon, and why we don't know where they're going next, basically, which I feel like is always a bad sign for a wrestling company that you don't know where the direction that it's headed.
Oh, I should have had me tag in there for some Jun Saito bashing, which I managed to not do throughout this entire episode, I want to point out. All right, thanks a lot, Gerard. We'll talk to you again, and thanks again to all our listeners. I'll talk to you again after a while.
Hi, I'm Andrew Rich, and if you're like me, you look at the state of modern wrestling discourse and think, wow, what a cesspool. That's why I'm here to tell you about Music of the Mat Remix. That's right, your favorite wrestling music podcast is back with a new format, where I bring on a guest and we play songs related to wrestling-themed topics. It could be a wrestling reference, a wrestling concept, a wrestling pun, things of that nature. Now you might be saying, Andrew, that is a very, very tenuous connection to pro wrestling on a wrestling podcast network. Is this just an excuse to hang out with your friends and talk about music and ignore the rest of the wrestling landscape? Yes. Yes, it is. So listen to Music of the Mat Remix on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, available on Apple, Spotify, or your podcast player of choice.